What's up, people? Welcome. This is Yoga Talks Podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Thank you for listening. How are you guys doing? Is everybody surviving the slow motion apocalypse? Wow, that was very extreme. I hope that's not actually true, but it feels a little bit like that sometimes. However, today I'm feeling a little bit immune to the slow motion apocalypse for one very specific reason, one very specific thing that happened to me today that has just, I don't know, it acted as a salve and like an energy boost, and I wanted to share it with you. And my wife Audrey is going to probably be terribly upset with me for doing this, but frankly, she hasn't even really been listening to the podcast these days, so there's a chance that she won't even hear it. And if she does, she'll be okay with it. Because here's what happened. You see, my wife, let's just say she hasn't been feeling that great these days. She just hasn't been feeling good about herself. We have a 2-year-old daughter, and she hasn't had her own time to move her body and exercise in the way that she wants to. She used to run, but her ankle hurts her now, so she can't run. We got her this recumbent bike, but she hadn't used it much. So in any case, in the last couple of weeks, she's really just been kind of getting herself together. I've been doing my best to give her the time, and she's been exercising a bunch and just, I think, feeling a lot better. And so today, I was like a little bit rushing around and trying to like get myself together. I had to go pick up my eldest daughter from gymnastics class. And I had like maybe, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes before I needed to be walking out the door. And I was walking into the bedroom, and she was just kind of winding down from a workout, just kind of doing a little bit of yoga and kind of winding down. And then she stood up, and then she kind of she shot me a look and just gave me like the full-on sex vibe. And I was like, whoa, yes, hello, beautiful woman who I love and is incredibly sexy and is giving me sex vibe. And we made out. We made out for like a good 5 minutes. And I mean like a real make out. Not like just like a little kiss, like full-on, deep make-out. And we knew it wasn't going to go anywhere because I had to walk out the door in 5 minutes to go pick up our eldest. My 2-year-old was in the next room playing with her Daniel Tiger trolley, right? But we just, for that few minutes, we just fully enjoyed each other again like we did, however, what is it? Oh my gosh, is it 15 years? It's a long time. So, I don't know. It was really awesome. It felt so good to just kiss deeply and feel my body pressed up against her. And just, with everything going on, I'm sure we're not the only ones who, it's hard to have that time. And even if we make it, even if we schedule the time to like really be there in that way. And I guess I just wanted to say, ladies out there listening, if you can maybe find a little of that for your man. And men listening, listen guys, got to be paying attention. And if they open that window, that's a window you got to open. Just because it's so important, to feel that. Feel the intimacy of loving embrace and sex. So, people, let's do it. Let's love each other, please. What do you say? It really helped me today, so I don't know. Okay, enough about me and my sex life. Let's talk about who's on the show today. Theo Wildcroft is on the show, and I know her through Facebook channels mostly. She's currently doing research for a doctoral thesis on yoga lineages and how yoga's come down through history and how it's happening today. And her work's intersecting with Mark Singleton and all those folks. She mentions them in our talk. So we've just, we've been running in some same internet circles. And not too long ago, she gave a shout out to the podcast. She wrote like a rundown of resources for people that she thought were useful. And one of those resources was this podcast. She was like, everybody should listen to this podcast. But then she added like a little jab in there. She said, but why does he not have anybody from the UK on his podcast ever? Can't we get somebody from somewhere other than North America? Like with a little smiley, And I liked it. I liked the jab. And, recently she wrote a few blog posts that I read that I really liked. What I found interesting is she's like doing this research, but I felt like there was this certain element that seemed very sort of almost to me punk rock, or like she seemed to be writing from a more mover place, or not like an academia place. Like the other folks I know in that realm, like I know their work from that academia.edu site, which is sort of like the Facebook for academics or whatever. And she might be on there too, I don't know. But like some of the writing that I've read of her recently felt more of like the world that I'm inhabiting. So I was happy to take her up on it, and I reached out to her. And we actually recorded this podcast on Inauguration Day. We mentioned that. Of course, we sort of have to. And it really was a wonderful thing to do on that day. And it was a great conversation to have. So I'm excited for you guys to hear that today. Last week, I mentioned that I wanted to read a couple emails. Let me do that. Got a couple here that I thought were worth reading. This one's from Asami. She says, "Hi, Jay. I wanted to write you today to say thank you. Your honesty to share your raw emotions touched my heart. I cried when I was listening to it on the bus when I was commuting to the studio. You mentioned that it feels like a virtual community, and I totally agree with you. I feel being a full-time yoga teacher isolates, and often I have to work alone. Having conversation about jobs or what we feel about philosophy is often challenging to do with other teachers. Listening to you and other teachers really helps me to understand the depth of yoga and how yoga changed during these years. But most importantly, I'm not alone in this. So thank you." Well, Asami, thank you. You're definitely not alone. I mean, maybe it feels that way. I know it feels like that sometimes. But I always remember one time I was traveling in India, and I ran into another traveler from, I think he was from Australia. And we almost immediately hit it off, like we felt like we were brothers. And I had been feeling very alone. And he just said this one thing to me. He said, "Oh, man, you're not alone, There's a whole network of us out there, man, even though you might not be around them." So I always like to think of that, You're not alone. There's always been people, and there are people who resonate in the same way. So thanks for reaching out, Asami. Appreciate it. And let me read one more, because I'm always worried that it's only yoga teachers that listen. And this is from someone who's not a yoga teacher. It says, "I found your podcast accidentally. I think I was typing hot yoga or something similar into the phone, trying to learn more about what I started doing on a fairly regular basis over the past 6 months, and was captivated. You said you sometimes wonder when people listen to the podcast, and for me, it's usually fairly early in the morning on my way to the train station. Picture a rather rainy, bleak, and dark post-industrial landscape in central England. I've been involved in yoga on and off for the past 20 years, actually, always as a practitioner and not a terribly good one. I came back to a regular practice 6 months ago because I sustained a serious running injury. I'm really grateful for the in-depth conversations you have with your guests and cherish them as they give me a chance to learn more about yoga. And more often than not, I struggle to come back to the mat, but the mat is where, at least for an hour or so, I stopped being an ex-runner, frustrated with my bodily limitations and the pain that doesn't go away. Your podcasts help me deepen my practice and find meaning to what is happening with me both on the mat and outside of the mat. And for that, I really want to thank you. So please keep up the good work and be reassured it is not just teachers that listen to you. It is also, to use running terminology, middle of the pack / mat yogis. Have a great day, Anya. Oh, thanks, Anya. I really appreciated getting this note. Not just because it makes me feel that the podcast might speak to someone outside of yoga teachers, but just because of what you described. That feels like the process of yoga helping me, and that coming through this podcast. So that's very exciting for me, and I really appreciate you providing me that feedback and your note. So thank you so much. Let me also plug a couple of stuff. Let me tell you my travel dates. I'm going to be in Tarrytown, New York on February 26th at Riverstone Yoga. I'm going to be in Japan March 18th through 26th. I'm going to be in West Hartford, Connecticut, April 30th at West Hartford Yoga. I am going to be starting my own teacher training program here in Brooklyn, May 5th, if you're local. And I'm going to be in Montana, June 17th through 24th at the Feathered Pipe Ranch. You can find out more information about all those gigs. You can find the archives of this podcast. You can check out my blog and my online yoga video offerings at jbrownyoga.com. All right, that's good. On the other side, I'll let you know who's coming on next week. And let's go ahead. Let's get to it. Let's talk to my new friend from the other side of the pond, Theo Wildcroft. Well, first of all, I'm so sorry that about the delay and the confusion on the time. I went to great lengths to try to make sure that I got it right, and I still got it wrong. And, you know, I also didn't even realize when we scheduled this, and I scheduled like a bunch of stuff today, like one other podcast even, and I rarely schedule 2 podcasts in a day, but I scheduled all this stuff on Inauguration Day without thinking that it was going to be Inauguration Day when I scheduled it. And for a half minute, I thought, oh, maybe I should reschedule. And then in the next breath, I was like, fuck that, no way, you know. Like, I'm going to do all the things that I care about today, you know. I'm not going to not do what I want to do and feel good about on this day. So I really appreciate you giving this opportunity to do something that I care about on this day.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange day, even from here, I think, because we don't really do inaugurations in the same way. Like when we change prime ministers, it's not really a big deal. I mean, obviously the fact is a big deal, but there aren't kind of, big events and balls and all the rest of it. So I guess we don't really understand that. And when I scheduled it in, I hadn't thought about it either. And it's only kind of yesterday I thought, hang on, there's something happening today.
It's true. It's true. And I guess I'm very aware of it and then kind of consciously, on some level, not paying full attention to it today. I kind of can.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll come back to that. Maybe we'll come back to the current politics of this nation, and maybe yours too, if we want at some point. But first, for me, this is also fun because this is another occasion where someone I only know from like Facebook posts comes into a more actuality where I actually connect with them a little bit more, even just in a conversation like this.
Yeah.
And so for me, you are part of like a kind of a group of people that I've sort of become acquainted with and friendly with through my online exchanges, who I put in my category of scholar practitioner.
Yeah.
People who are really doing, research and academic study into a range of topics that you and I both are really interested in.
Yeah.
And first, I guess I have a question for you, because I use the word scholar a lot, but you always use the word researcher. And I'm curious, is there a difference in your mind between those two things?
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, I guess I've been slightly trained to use the word scholar to refer more to academics. I mean, the lines are really blurry these days, I think. But I think something that's scholarly, or somebody who's engaged in something scholarly, has that sense of being within at least a semi-institutional context. Somebody who's got peer review as part of that process, somebody who's in that system. So I would generally use the word researcher to be a little bit more general than that, I think. Because for me, the work that I'm doing, and the work that Matthew's doing, for example, Matthew Remsky's doing, and, it's all similar work, right? It may have slightly different contexts and a slightly different thing, slightly different context in which it has to prove itself, I guess. But the urge behind it, the drive behind it is the same. That's the thing. So there are upsides and downsides to being in these different situations. I mean, Matthew has to, in a sense, he has to answer to a whole community of people that have crowdfunded his project. Whereas for me, it's, a university system and a couple of supervisors. So long as they're happy and so long as my examiners are happy at the end, that's okay. So it's different people that we're trying to prove things through to, but in the end, the endeavor is the same, and the endeavor is this sense of research, this sense of investigation, really, I guess.
Well, I hear that, and I certainly think that kind of investigation is happening on kind of more of like a non-scholarly level too, just in terms of like how people are practicing and teaching. And honestly, for me, I think I'm sometimes feeling a little bit intimidated to have like a more academically oriented person on, because I'm not so academically oriented, and I worry, like, am I going to be able to hold down a conversation if I don't know how to talk that talk? But the reason I felt more comfortable, I think, to have you on is because I've also read posts from you where you really do seem to not just live in this more scholarly language, but you come from a mover place sometimes in terms of how you speak about things.
I think also the thing, I had a conversation with a friend of mine once who expressed very similar kind of feeling that she felt like she couldn't talk to me about yoga. And one of the things that I pointed out to her is I said, what do you think my research is about? And she said, well, it's about yoga. I said, yeah, it's about yoga teachers. So if I can't talk to you about it, then I have a problem, basically, it's about.
Well, again, I mean, I think the research that's going on and the things that people are discovering are super important. And it's important to the practitioners, not just people who are interested in more of like the scholarly side,
Yeah.
Like you wrote something, I read something that you wrote. It says like academia is generally silent on the realities of modern yoga practice.
Yes.
And yoga practitioners seldom ask like, how does this person know what they're telling us to be true?
Yeah.
And I think that kind of bridge, the scholar practitioner kind of bridging that is super vital right now.
It's great, and it allows me to rant in a lot of different places, which is quite good for me. I find I'm quite happy if I've got something to be something to kind of rant about. And I had a conversation with one of my supervisors a little while ago because I had somebody review a piece of work of mine in which I'm talking about some really radical yoga events. I'm talking about kind of 150 people in a field, a bunch of hippies. They're all chopping vegetables together. It's all kind of ashram cooking. It's all vegan. They're all talking about social justice. It's a hardcore kind of environment. And one, person reviewed the piece of work that I'd written, and they basically said, what is the difference between this and commercial yoga? And I I had a conversation with my supervisor and I just went off. I was like, how can they not see the difference between these things? This is just a phenomenal difference. This is like, you just cannot compare these two things. You cannot compare commercial contemporary yoga to what's going on in this field. And he said, well, that's great, because that means you have something to talk about.
But that's an interesting question. That's always been an issue. You have all these people doing very different things and all using the same word.
Yeah.
So making those distinctions, like being able to distinguish why one class is different from another, is more and more important. It's always been important, but even more so these days, I think
so. And I think, Carol Horton said something a year or two back where she was saying that the distinction increasingly isn't between different schools and different styles, right? And so both on a scholarly level and in terms of yoga culture as a whole, we tend to think, well, this is Ashtanga, this is Power Yoga, this is Vinyasa, this is Scaravelli, whatever it might be. And those distinctions are becoming less important. What's becoming more important is, what's your purpose? What are you intending by the work that you do? So if your intention is to, live your perfect life, be blessed, be a bendy Instagram yogi,
with a prosperous life of wealth and beaches.
Absolutely. If that's your purpose, then you're one kind of yoga practitioner or one kind of yoga teacher. If I've got people I've interviewed who bounced down to Calais to feed refugees in an informal refugee camp. That's their purpose to yoga. They're all about, how do we change the world through this? I know people whose passion is working with people with special needs, for example. It's so different in terms of what we're bringing to yoga, and therefore what we're getting out of it. And part of my question is that, does the practice look different as a result?
I think that's a question that I think really wants to be considered. Right? I think in my experience, there's so much talk these days about like yoga as like a profession or a career, but the people who are really the people you're describing, it's more of a calling. Yep. You just feel like, I should be doing this. Like, I need to do this. And even if it doesn't even make sense because you don't make much money, you do it anyways. It's like, you don't pursue it as an ambitious, money-making career. You do it because your heart feels like that tells you what you should do.
Yeah. There's, people, we all live in a world where we need to pay the rent, and we need to have some sort of commercial transactions in our lives, and that's kind of inescapable. But nonetheless, so much of the culture we're talking about isn't done on the basis of that kind of transaction. It's you do your podcast. I'm assuming nobody pays you to do it. Nobody's paying me to do it, right?
No, this is just out of the grace of everybody's heart that they give me their time and let me talk to them.
So then there's the time, so on and so forth. Now, okay, yes, there's a benefit to that in terms of your visibility online and those kinds of things. But at some point, that logic of applying the rules of capitalism to this just has to run out, because it just doesn't make any sense. There's events that the people I talk about where they find £50,000 a year to put an event on, and they don't take any money out of it. So they break even. But as a commercial transaction or a commercial event, that makes no sense whatsoever.
I know. Believe me, I know. It's interesting because a lot of yoga people start their yoga businesses for yoga reasons, and then they have to figure out the business side of it. And, for myself, I'm the example. I've had my center for 9 years, and I've always made decisions on intuition and instinct, which is not good business. You're supposed to have a strategy and a plan and execute it. And I don't think people often do that when it comes to yoga teachers who become yoga business people. At least eventually they start to get smarter, and they try to start having more of a plan. In any case, well, it makes me think. I had a conversation recently with Douglas Rushkoff, who's quite a thinker on these matters, and he was kind of saying that a lot of it is just this idea of growth, that we always have to grow. So, a yoga center will build and come into its own and be thriving, but it can't just stay there and thrive. if the rent's always going up, it has to continue to grow.
Yeah.
So that model, whether that's corporate or local in real estate, is really what is kind of what I feel like you're pointing to in a way, this, as opposed to like a peer-to-peer thing where we can really just exchange value together.
Yeah, and also that, you know, the idea of endless growth is complete anathema to most of us who actually work with yoga long term. I mean, again, you see, there's the link with the practice, because if you have a long term practice as a human being, eventually something's going to break. Eventually you will have to deal with aging and injury and change. You'll have to deal with the fact that, you know, some days you can do things and some days you can't. It isn't an endless progression until, you know, Ashtanga third series or whatever. You know, at some point the things start to become less about an endless progression. And I think we feel that and we live that in our bodies. And as a result, it doesn't make sense to apply that to the world around us either, really. And the best practitioners and the best teachers I know work with an idea, you know, of learning from what is broken and learning from grief and learning from combining a sense of discipline with a sense of self-acceptance as well. You know.
Well, I agree. I think I've discovered this, and I think a lot of people have, that there is kind of like a law of diminishing marginal utility to physical practice. Or something that, like, there's a point where I thought in my mind, like, if I just do more, it'll only increase and be better. And on a physical level, that's certainly proved not to be true, that you can definitely overwork your body. And at some point, it's diminishing your functionality and not actually helpful.
Yeah, it's really fun. One of the things I've noticed recently is that I see, for some reason, over the last kind of 6 months or so, I've seen various adverts online for kind of people offering kind of handstands and hand balancing workshops. And with that kind of more kind of critical eye applying to it, I've just noticed that every single one of them is run by guys in their late 20s who are physically fit and able to begin with. And I'm like, okay, come along to my class, take my, you know, 60-year-old kind of, you know, just recovering from a heart top kind of people. You take those people, take the woman suffering from vertigo who's 70, you know, you take them to a hand balance. If you can get them to hand balance in an afternoon, then I might be interested.
But why? What's the purpose? I mean, I guess what I also want to say about that is it seems like the best teachers I know have at some point realized that the physical practice serves purpose, right? So if the practice is done for reasons that serve you in your life situation, then it's effective. But if it's just so that you can do a hand balance, as just that's the thing that's the skill that you're learning from it, then that seems to be a pretty hollow pursuit on a lot of levels.
It is. It's where is the intent for your practice coming from? Right? And that seems like such a simple thing, but it is a huge and ongoing question. You know, and we have this kind of repeated kind of versions of the same mantra in contemporary yoga that we've used, that are taking us all on a very interesting journey, which is essentially that idea of looking for the wisdom within. You know, listen to your body, listen to yourself. You know, what happens when you go in there, right? What is it you're looking for? You know, what happens when you get into is it possible to know the body on that really deep visceral level? You know, can you know by listening to your hip joints whether you've got a labral tear happening? Can you know that, you know, I mean, I've got a little knot that tends to happen in my right shoulder blade that I believe is connected to a traffic accident I had 20 odd years ago. I believe that's why it's there. I believe that I can eventually get it to move and melt, you know, but who knows, right? It's all so nebulous when you get inside. So then what is it you're reaching for? And then you get this wonderful term, kind of functionality, right? A movement. This is what we're all into, functional movement now. Everything has to be functional, right? Yeah. And then my question is, well, what does that mean, right? What's functional?
Yeah, it's a good question. What does functional mean?
What's natural? Because if we're not careful, it starts to look like the same kind of corporal fascism, if you like, that means that only guys in their 20s who are perfectly able-bodied and fit and healthy get to do it, right?
Right. All right. So here's my definition, and then you can tell me if you think it's an okay one or not. Like, the way that I usually would say this is that there's a kind of a mindset to challenging your body to be able to do more. You know, like if you want to run marathons or climb mountains, or you want to do gymnastic body positions, like there's a mindset of like a no pain, no gain, like reaching for your fullest potential mindset. Yeah. And that's totally effective for those things. That's why, you know, Olympic stars excel. Yeah. And you like kind of need that. But that mindset's not so good for me if all I want is to just, you know, feel okay with the fact that I'm alive today. Yeah. You know, like if I just want to have less pain and feel okay with my existence, then that mindset's kind of counterproductive. Mm-hmm. So functional to me means it's just about having less pain in my body, doing what I needed to do in my life.
It's contextual, right? It's contextual. It's based on where you are and what you want to do. Yeah. I'm also interested in the concept of resilience as well. No, so I tend to say with, you know, the students that I have, I tend to say that my aim is to help increase their range of resilience, you know, so that, you know, not everything has to be fit for purpose for exactly what you want to do today, because tomorrow you might want to do something slightly different. So how can we change that? And then the third factor for me, which I think we're not really talking about so much yet, is the idea of expression, that movement can be expressive, not just functional. That, you know, I mean, part of me would love to do fantastic hand balances. I mean, I can just about stick a crow if I'm, you know, that's about my level. You know, I can do it, and my students, bless them, are deeply impressed by this. But you know, I would love to float into a one-handed handstand or all this kind of thing, because I think the expression of that would be a wonderful thing. Am I prepared for the cost of it? No. No, I'm not prepared.
See, I agree. To me, I think of things like that, like a crow pose or a handstand. I think of those as like celebratory poses. Yeah. Like if I'm doing really well and I feel good and I want to like celebrate that, I would do something like that. Yeah. But I don't see those always as the way that you build strength. Like sometimes trying to stick that on a day where you're tired, that doesn't make you stronger.
No. But you know, celebration and expression is also part of life, right? It's also part of who we are. Yeah. There's an old Matthew Ramsky blog post. I haven't quite forgiven him for doing a series of blog posts on Wild Thing, because I'm an ex-Anusara teacher. I don't teach Wild Thing, but I do it. I still do it.
See? Oh, that's perfect, because that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to, like, ask you about some of your background in yoga. And Wild Thing, in a particular, that pose is not a pose that I'm a fan of. So if you like it, then we can have a good talk about it.
I love it.
Maybe.
I don't teach it. I don't teach it to other people, but, you know, you see me in my practice.
Yeah, but for your body, you feel like you can do it in a way that's supported and doesn't hurt you.
I feel I can take the risk. No.
But clearly you like it enough, or you would enjoy it enough that you would take that risk, which is really, to me, like one of the reasons to do some of these things is they're fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a valid reason. I'm okay with that reason.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Life has to be more than function.
All right, so you said just now that you trained in Anusara. So let's go back. Where does your yoga start? Like, what was your first yoga class?
Okay, well, I think my first yoga class was probably way back when at university the first time around. So that's about 24, 25 years ago now.
Okay. And that was at a university? What kind of class was it?
Do you know, it was so long ago. It was probably just your average little Hatha class. I didn't really get it. I kind of enjoyed it, but I kind of flitted in and out of things for years. You know, I would do, it's that standard thing, or I would do a class because there was one nearby to me, and I would do it for a few months, and then I would kind of lose interest, and I wasn't, you know, it took a long time to get me. It took a long time to kind of really catch hold.
Okay, so what were you doing in college? What were you studying?
I was studying languages and literature first time around. I have this is my third degree in 3 different subjects, which is quite fun. Because my master's was social sciences and now I'm religious studies, so it's a little bit crazy. So I was doing.
You see, you're somebody who likes to be in the books.
I like Oh, you see, this is all connected because I have without going into too much detail right now, I have a fairly intense childhood history, a traumatic history. So I was very dissociative, but I'm also quite bright, apparently. So therefore...
Wait a second. I'm sorry. That was a little bit too vague for me to understand. You don't have to go into great detail, but can you say a little bit more? Like you had some bad things happen to you.
Seriously, long-term relational abuse. Yeah. When I was a child. Yeah. So like a lot of it.
And then that led you to be someone who spent a lot of time in books. Is that what
because
you're saying?
I wasn't spending any time in my body. Yeah. None. I didn't. I mean, I wouldn't. I was, by the time I got to university, I had to remind myself to eat. I had to remind myself to sleep. I really wasn't in my body at all. But I always moved, I'd go dancing a lot. And, I sort of...
Well, I had someone else on the podcast, Sam Chase. He said a similar thing. He was like a Rhodes Scholar who turned it down. He turned it down. And he said because he was just like this boy with a brain for like the major portion of his life, and then he had to get in his body, and that's kind of where yoga came in for him, like as a way to get into his body.
No, that's absolutely the same. So I actually went, I got to the end of the degree, and then I didn't get the results I needed to stay on, which was the best thing that could have happened to me, because I actually had to, go out and be in the world for a bit, and.
What did you do when you had to go out in the world? Did you get a job?
I bummed around France for a couple of years and made trouble with with a few friends, and I came out as well, so that was fun.
Okay, that's a big thing.
That was kind of exciting. And then I came back to London and appalled my father by training as a tattooist for about 18 months.
Wow! So you came out and then became a tattooist.
Yeah. Only for about 18 months.
that's a double whammy for your dad, wasn't it?
I do like to say that I kind of waited because the university I got to was Cambridge, so I waited until the end of Cambridge and then dropped out, basically.
Well, when you graduate from Cambridge, then I guess he can't say a lot, right? He can't.
Well, what he said, I think I remember him saying, kind of pausing and saying, "I thought you were coming back to London to get a proper job." Which then we had a conversation about what a proper job was.
Yeah, I bet you did. All right. So now you're back in London. You're out. You're a tattoo artist. Do you go to yoga classes?
No, not at this point. No. I'm still doing a lot of dancing, and I was apprenticing rather than anything else. But bodies were already becoming a fascination. The idea of marking the body, the idea of modifying the body, getting into body modification as a whole, that I had a few piercings, that kind of thing. So it was the start of a process of getting back in touch with myself, really. But it was a fairly hardcore way to do it. And then I kind of drifted away from that after a couple of years, and got into kind of early web design stuff. And into the rave scene, and so dropped out even further, basically.
Oh, wow. Well, that's so interesting, because I talked with Rushkoff about that too. Like, there was a time in my life where I left Los Angeles, and then I went back 6 months later to like visit for Christmas break, and like all my friends were raving hardcore. Yeah. And it was like a world, and I remember going to the big raves, and kind of there was sort of like a freedom, I don't know, coming out of the 80s or something to that scene, There
was. And I think the thing as well in London, at least, is it is slightly different in that the connection between raving and a fairly radical kind of underground nature, because it was tied up with things coming out of the road protest movement and travelers and free parties and those kinds of things. So it was an environment that was very radical in terms of its interpersonal politics. It didn't really have any solutions, but we were all gonna
and it kind of went south for some of my friends, a little bit, all that from Thursday to Sunday, rave to after hours club. There's only so much X you can take, I'm blind. Wow. Well, okay, so you're raving, you're tattooing, and then where do you go from there? I'm still wondering how you get to a more like steady yoga practice or something.
It's a little bit crazy. So then I met my husband actually, and we moved out of London not long after 9/11 actually, and although that didn't have necessarily a direct impact, there was a feeling like London wasn't safe anymore, that it didn't feel safe, primarily in the way that protests were being policed, that everything felt very edgy and a little bit hardcore. So we started to move out. We started to want to have a lifestyle that was a little more personally sustainable as well. And I got into some youth work. So I was doing some youth work, and then through that into some community development work and engagement work there. I ended up working for one of the kind of, for a little while I had a proper job working for a huge conservation charity here in the UK. And I started going to yoga classes. And this was a fairly traditional Mysore Ashtanga practice in Oxford. So, I mean, I only went to the class once a week, but I'd have, maybe a 4 days a week home practice as well. So that I had a couple of years of that. And I was also taking Kung Fu classes as well. So I had a couple of years of that going on as well. So that was really interesting, because that was about finding a challenge and finding discipline in my body. Beyond the hedonism. It was, okay, what does it take to make change happen? What does it take to get stronger? What does it take to improve your balance? Like how exploring those kind of things that I hadn't explored before.
Ashtanga practice 5 days a week can kind of get you in your body can it?
Yeah.
in some way. I mean, there's lots of different ways to get into your body. That's one way to get into your body. And if you're coming out of tattooing and piercing, that makes sense. It
was all on that. But at the time, and then I was also getting into softening and starting to become more aware of the ways in which I needed to nourish myself and nurture myself, and I was kind of heading into, I was into my 30s by that point.
And you said you were working with specialized populations, or you were helping others. That kind of softened you some, probably.
Yeah. I was working with those in those kind of environments, and when we moved, I just ended up with a studio in the next town over. That there was an Anusara studio, which here is very, very unusual. I know they were kind of two on every street corner in the US for a while there, but here it was fairly unusual. And it was the first time I'd had a contact with that really quite seductive, freedom can be yours. Open your heart right now, lean back, curl back, do this, do that, and
feel the grace, the grace.
Right? Open to grace, and all is coming. And it appealed to that kind of overachieving kind of type A side of me, because the alignment is so ridiculously precise. It's just when you've worked out where your tailbone is, they're trying to tell you to lengthen down one side and then the other and do this and do that. So there was endless stuff.
That's the Iyengar influence, I think.
Yeah, massive. And I trained to teach.
You see, so you took to the practice, to the spirals, and maybe some to the philosophy, the tantric philosophy, right? Yeah. Because life, in many ways, for various periods in my life, had been quite hard. So a philosophy that says it's okay, it's all going to be okay, is always going to be more seductive, I think, at that point. No, and I think it's true. I embrace a tantric philosophy, but at the same time, I wonder, when you came into it, how connected to it was to John, because I know when it first started out, there was actually they were pointing to Kashmir Shaivism, but then later on he rewrote it.
Well, I came in, I think it almost parallels my teacher training journey with Anusara. So just when I was starting to think about maybe going for certification, so I'd done the Inspired thing, I'd had a couple of years teaching That was when it all started to really go a little bit south. And I met John. I mean, we'd meet him on workshops. So every year he'd come over somewhere to Europe, and we'd figure out where he was going to be in Europe and how we could get there, you know. And when that was, and then to begin with, that felt really exciting. By the time it was, you know, we were spending hundreds and hundreds of pounds trying to get to Geneva to stand in a room with hundreds of people, and he was so glazed, like, you know, he was so into his own hype by that point. And there was something out of control about it.
So you felt like from time when you had met him earlier on, there was a change, and then when you saw him later, he took on a new quality.
Yeah, and maybe that was even more obvious because we only saw him once a year or once every couple of years. Mm-hmm. So, you know, he'd come back and it would be like, this is different. There's something about this that's not making sense. And I remember, I remember a couple of things that I talked to Matthew about, actually. I remember at a teacher training intensive in Paris when a young woman stood up, and she must have been all of kind of 19, 20, and she was talking about her own, obviously still very visceral, very real history of childhood sexual abuse. She told this story about how yoga was helping her come to herself. And there was silence, and then John said, "We're going to fix you."
Oof.
And my heart dropped. You know, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
You can't.
Oh, my whole system went off just now when you said it. Even in retelling the story, I was like, really?
Yeah. And given my personal history, that was the first time I thought something has gone wrong here. Something has gone beyond what is safe and sensible and achievable here, basically.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.